Hey, everyone. If you're listening to this, you're probably getting ready for the IELTS speaking exam.
Ah, yes.
And probably want to avoid those, classic mistakes that can trip people up.
For sure.
We're doing a deep dive today based on this podcast episode we found.
Okay.
Called 15 Deadly Mistakes That Kill Your IELTS Speaking Score in 2025. We're going to break it down.
Sounds good.
It's more than just a list, though.
Right.
It's about, getting why these things actually matter to examiners.
Yeah, definitely.
Ready to, unlock the secrets to acing this thing.
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting that this episode pointed out is that the IELTS speaking test is not about, giving this perfect memorized answer.
Yeah, it's not about being a robot.
Yeah.
It's about showing that you can really communicate in English.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to sound like a robot just reading from a script in, a normal conversation, right?
Exactly. And the examiners are actually trained to spot those overly rehearsed answers, which can actually bring your score down.
Oh, really?
They're listening for naturalness and, genuine communication.
So how do they measure that? Well, I know the episode mentioned 4 key areas.
Yeah, fluency, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation.
Okay, so let's unpack those.
Okay.
First up, fluency.
All right.
I feel like a lot of people think fluency is just about speaking quickly.
It's a common misconception.
But I'm guessing it's more nuanced than that.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's more like, think about a river flowing smoothly downstream.
Okay.
That's fluency.
Okay.
A natural, coherent flow of speech.
Makes sense.
Speaking too fast can actually disrupt that flow and make you sound less fluent.
So it's not about speed, but about clarity and connection.
Exactly.
What about things like pauses and fillers?
Okay.
Are those always bad?
Not necessarily. In fact, well-placed pauses can actually make you sound more thoughtful. Imagine you're asked a complex question. Taking a moment to gather your thoughts before responding shows you're considering the question carefully.
Oh!
Which demonstrates a deeper understanding.
Wow. I never thought about pauses that way.
Yeah.
I always tried to, eliminate them completely, thinking they made me sound hesitant.
Yeah, that's a common mistake.
But I guess it's all about how you use them.
Exactly. It's about being deliberate and using pauses strategically to enhance your communication.
Oh, okay.
Now, the flip side of that is those pesky filler words.
Uh-huh.
The ums and ahs that can clutter our speech.
Oh, yeah, those can be a real fluency killer.
They can.
I feel like they pop up the most when I'm nervous or trying to think of the right word.
Absolutely. And while the occasional filler word is natural, overusing them can disrupt the flow of your speech.
Okay.
And make it harder for the listener to follow your ideas.
Yeah.
The episode even compares them to getting snagged on rocks in that river we were talking about.
Right.
Disrupting that smooth flow.
That makes sense. So for fluency, it's about finding that sweet spot.
Yes.
Not too fast, not too slow, with well-placed pauses and minimal fillers.
Exactly.
It's about letting your ideas flow naturally and connecting with the listener.
Precisely.
Okay, so we talked about fluency.
Right.
What about vocabulary?
Okay.
The episode mentions limited vocabulary as a major mistake.
It is.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems pretty obvious that having a strong vocabulary is important.
Right.
But I think it's easy to fall into the trap of just memorizing a bunch of fancy words without really understanding how to use them effectively.
You're so right.
It's not about sounding like you swallowed a thesaurus.
Right.
The IELTS examiners want to see that you can use a range of vocabulary appropriately and naturally to express your ideas with precision.
So it's about using the right words in the right context.
Yes.
Like having the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
It's not about showing off, but about clear communication.
Exactly.
And the episode actually connects vocabulary and sentence structure, right?
Yes. Mistake number 12 is about not using a range of sentence structures.
Uh-huh.
And it's closely tied to vocabulary.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. A limited vocabulary is like having a basic toolbox. You can build simple things, but you're limited in what you can create.
Okay.
A wider vocabulary gives you more tools, allowing you to build more complex and interesting structures.
So expanding your vocabulary naturally leads to more sophisticated sentence structures.
Exactly.
It's like leveling up your language skills.
Exactly. And the episode suggests several ways to expand your vocabulary, like reading widely and actively listening to native speakers.
Okay.
But it also stresses the importance of using these new words and phrases in conversation.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like having a shiny new sports car and never taking it out of the garage.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
You need to actually drive that vocabulary around to get comfortable with it.
Exactly.
But what about the other way around? Can using different sentence structures help you expand your vocabulary?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it's definitely possible when you try to express your ideas in different ways using various sentence structures, you naturally start looking for new words and phrases to convey your meaning more effectively.
So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Yes.
Expanding your vocabulary encourages you to use more complex sentences.
Right.
Which in turn motivates you to learn even more words.
Exactly. And that's how you start developing a richer and more nuanced command of the English language.
That's amazing.
It is.
Okay, we've covered fluency and vocabulary.
Right.
What about the foundation of it all, grammar?
Okay.
I'm guessing that's pretty crucial for the IELTS speaking exam, too.
You bet it is.
Yeah.
Even with excellent fluency and vocabulary, ignoring grammar accuracy can really undermine your credibility. It's like building a beautiful house on a shaky foundation.
Right. It's like those online articles with tons of typos and grammatical errors.
Exactly.
It just makes you question the author's credibility, even if the content is interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's dive deeper into mistake #8 and explore why grammatical accuracy is so essential for effective communication, especially in a high-stakes situation like the IELTS speaking test.
Here's where things get really interesting.
For sure.
Stay tuned as we unpack the importance of grammar and how it impacts your IELTS speaking score.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle grammar.
Right.
I have to admit, this is the part that makes me a little nervous, you know?
Yeah.
Always worried about messing up tenses or using the wrong articles.
I understand grammar can feel like a minefield sometimes.
Right.
But it's important to remember that the examiners aren't looking for perfection.
Okay.
They want to see that you can use grammar accurately enough to communicate your ideas clearly.
So it's not about memorizing every single grammar rule.
No.
But about understanding the fundamentals and applying them effectively.
Exactly. Think of it like building a house.
Okay.
You need a strong foundation to support the rest of the structure.
Yeah.
In language, that foundation is grammar. It provides the framework for clear and effective communication.
That makes sense, but how do we know which grammar rules to focus on?
Right.
There are so many.
The podcast episode suggests reviewing common grammar pitfalls that can trip up non-native speakers,
Okay.
like subject-verb agreement articles and tense consistency.
Okay.
Those are the areas where even small errors can affect your clarity and credibility.
Right. And I remember they also cautioned against overcomplicating things.
Yeah.
Which is mistake number 13.
Yes.
Sometimes I get so caught up in trying to use complex grammar structures that I end up making more mistakes.
Yes, it's like trying to impress someone with a fancy vocabulary word you don't fully understand. It could backfire and make you sound less credible.
So it's about finding that balance between accuracy and naturalness.
Exactly.
You want to be grammatically correct, but not at the expense of clarity and flow.
Exactly. And that ties back to our earlier discussion about sounding natural and avoiding robotic responses.
Right.
When you're focusing too much on grammar rules, you might end up sounding stiff and unnatural.
Okay.
It's better to aim for clear and concise sentences that convey your meaning effectively.
Now, speaking of things that can disrupt the natural flow of conversation, let's talk about pacing.
Okay.
Mistake number 9 is speaking too fast or too slow.
Right.
I know I tend to speed up when I'm nervous, which sometimes makes me stumble over my words.
Nerves definitely play a role.
Yeah.
When we're anxious, our heart rate goes up, and we might start speaking faster without even realizing it.
Oh, okay.
But speaking too quickly can make it harder for the listener to understand you, especially if you're not enunciating clearly.
And I guess the opposite is true, too.
Yeah.
Speaking too slowly can make you sound hesitant and uncertain.
Exactly. It's all about finding that Goldilocks zone,
Uh-huh.
a pace that is comfortable for both you and the listener.
Okay.
The episode mentions the technique of using a metronome to practice pacing.
Right.
But I think the most important thing is to be aware of your natural speaking speed and to adjust it slightly if necessary.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're speaking clearly and confidently, but not rushing or dragging your words.
Exactly.
It sounds like self-awareness and practice are key here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that brings us to mistake number 10.
Yeah.
Which is a big one. Lack of confidence.
Yeah.
Test anxiety is a real thing.
Yeah, it's the worst.
And it can really impact your performance on the IELTS speaking test.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with test anxiety.
They do.
And it can manifest in so many ways.
It can.
Some people freeze up, some people ramble, some people even forget simple words they know perfectly well.
It's all about how our brains react to stress.
Right.
When we're feeling anxious, our fight or flight response kicks in, and it can be hard to think clearly and access the language we need.
Yeah, for sure.
The podcast episode emphasizes that confidence is something you can build, and it offers some practical tips for doing so.
What kind of tips? Because honestly, this is an area where I could really use some help.
Well, one of the most effective strategies is practice.
Okay.
The more you practice speaking English in a variety of situations, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
Makes sense.
They also recommend things like mock interviews and speaking in front of a mirror.
Those sound helpful.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Exactly.
And I guess even just the act of preparing for the test can help boost your confidence.
Exactly. When you know you've put in the effort and you're familiar with the format of the test and the types of questions that might ask, you're less likely to feel overwhelmed and anxious.
Preparation breeds confidence.
It does.
So we've talked about fluency, vocabulary, grammar, pacing, and confidence.
We have.
Are you starting to see a pattern here?
Definitely. It seems like all of these mistakes can be traced back to one core principle: effective communication.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about speaking perfect English. It's about being able to express yourself clearly, confidently, and engagingly.
And that brings us to mistake number 11, which is failing to organize your thoughts.
Okay.
This one can be a real challenge, especially in a high-pressure situation like the IELTS speaking test.
Right. When I'm nervous, my thoughts tend to jump all over the place.
Yeah.
And it can be hard to stay focused and present a coherent response.
Yeah, that's
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But the good news is that organizing your thoughts is a skill you can learn and practice.
So how do we do that? Are there any specific techniques or frameworks we can use to help us stay on track?
Absolutely. The podcast episode suggests thinking of your response like a mini presentation.
Okay.
It should have a clear introduction, supporting details, and a conclusion.
Okay.
It's about presenting your ideas in a logical and structured way that is easy for the listener to follow.
So it's like building a house again.
Exactly.
You need a solid framework to support the rest of the structure.
Right.
A clear introduction sets the stage, the supporting details provide the substance, and the conclusion ties everything together nicely. Exactly. And it doesn't have to be overly formal or rigid.
Okay.
The key is to have a general structure in mind so that you don't get lost in your thoughts and end up rambling or going off on tangents.
That makes sense. And I guess even just taking a moment to pause and gather your thoughts before you start speaking can help you organize your ideas and present them more effectively.
You're absolutely right. A well-placed pause can be a powerful tool for both fluency and organization.
Wow.
Now let's shift gears and talk about something you might not expect: nonverbal communication.
Okay.
Mistake number 14 is ignoring nonverbal cues.
Right.
And it's a surprisingly important aspect of the IELTS speaking test.
Wait, really? I thought the IELTS speaking test was all about, speaking.
Yeah.
How can nonverbal communication play a role, especially if the examiner can't even see you?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how much nonverbal cues can impact communication, even in an audio-only context.
So even though the examiner might not be able to see you, things like tone of voice, pacing, and even the way you hold yourself can affect how you sound and how your message is perceived.
Exactly. It's about projecting confidence and enthusiasm through your voice and your overall presence, even if you're not face-to-face with the examiner.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly.
It sounds like nonverbal communication plays a much bigger role than we realize, even in situations where we think it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And that's why the podcast episode emphasizes the importance of paying attention to your nonverbal cues, even during an audio-only test.
Okay.
Things like good posture, making eye contact with the microphone, and even smiling can actually affect how you sound and how confident you appear.
Wow. I never thought about it that way. I always thought nonverbal communication was mainly about body language and facial expressions, but it sounds like it's much more nuanced than that.
You're absolutely right. It's about being aware of how you're presenting yourself both verbally and nonverbally, and making sure your message is coming across clearly and effectively.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from fluency and vocabulary to grammar, pacing, confidence organization, and even nonverbal communication.
We have.
It's amazing how all of these elements come together to create a truly engaging and effective communication experience.
It is.
But is there anything we've missed? Any final tips or insights from the podcast episode that we should touch on?
There's one final mistake that deserves our attention, and it's one that can make a huge difference in your IELTS speaking score.
Okay.
It's mistake number 15, not seeking constructive feedback.
Feedback.
Yeah.
It's so crucial for growth, but it can also be a bit daunting to receive, especially if it's not all positive.
Can be.
But I'm guessing it's essential for identifying areas where we can improve.
You're exactly right. It's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubble and not realize what we need to work on.
Right.
But getting feedback from others, especially those who are more experienced or knowledgeable, can help us see our blind spots and identify areas where we can grow.
So it's like having a fresh pair of eyes on your work. Someone who can offer a different perspective and point out things you might not have noticed yourself.
Yes.
But how do we find people to give us feedback, and what's the best way to approach them?
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
The podcast episode suggests finding a teacher, a language partner, or even a friend who is fluent in English,
Okay.
and asking them to listen to you speak and offer constructive criticism.
I like that you emphasize constructive criticism.
Yeah.
It's so important to find someone who can give you honest feedback without being overly critical or discouraging.
Right. You want someone who can point out areas for improvement
Yeah.
while also acknowledging your strengths and encouraging you to keep learning and growing.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between honest feedback and positive encouragement.
It is.
And remember, even if the feedback isn't always what you want to hear, it's an opportunity to learn and improve. So embrace it.
Embrace it.
So we've explored these 15 mistakes, and it seems like they all point back to the importance of effective communication. But how do we bring all of these elements together and actually apply them in the real world, especially in a high-pressure situation like the IELTS speaking test?
That's the million-dollar question, you say. And it's one that we'll tackle head-on in our final segment.
Okay, stay tuned as we wrap up this deep dive into the 15 mistakes that could kill your IELTS speaking score in 2025. We'll synthesize everything we've learned and offer some actionable strategies for putting it all into practice. You won't want to miss this. All right, so we've unpacked these 15 mistakes.
We have.
But honestly, it feels like the real lesson here is bigger than just ticking off a list of don'ts.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right.
If we zoom out and look at the common thread weaving through all these mistakes, it's about mastering the art of communication.
Okay.
It's not about speaking perfect English. It's about truly connecting with the listener and expressing yourself clearly and authentically.
So less about being a flawless English speaker, more about being a captivating communicator.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about those speakers you love to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Like a friend telling a story, a professor explaining a complex idea, or even a podcast host who keeps you hooked.
Right.
What makes them so engaging?
Well, it's like they pull you in.
Yeah.
It's their passion, their clarity, how they connect with their audience.
Exactly. And that authenticity shines through. You can sense when someone is genuinely into what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference.
And that's something you can bring to the IELTS exam, too, even if you're like a nervous wreck.
Absolutely. Remember, the examiners are human, too.
That's true.
They want to see you do well.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the pressure of the test.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's just a conversation, a chance to share your thoughts and ideas in English.
And that's something to get excited about.
Yeah.
Think of it as an opportunity to showcase your personality and your unique perspective.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like one final thought-provoking question we can leave our listeners with?
Of all the 15 mistakes we discussed, which one resonated with you the most? And what's one small action you can take today to start improving in that area?
I love that it's those small steps consistently taken that lead to big results.
They do.
Keep practicing. Stay curious.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way.
Because those mistakes are actually valuable learning opportunities.
True.
Best of luck on your IELTS journey.
Thanks for joining us.
You got this.